We're unlocking forgotten things from 1940s to 1960s America. The sounds, the smells, the stories you thought were gone. If you've ever missed the good old days, you're in the right place. So don't scroll. Stick around, because the past, it's waiting for you. We're starting our journey in the unforgettable 1940s, a decade of sacrifice, strength, and memories that refuse to fade. Every goodbye started with brown leather suitcases tied shut with string. You'd help carry them to the train, dodging pigeons and wishing for more time. Hugs were fast. Tears were quiet. You didn't say everything just enough. Then they'd disappear behind the glass. Brothers, cousins, uncles off to wherever the army sent them. The Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, wrapped in giant colored bulbs that burned hot to the touch. Real tinsel made from lead hung heavy and shimmered like magic. The house smelled like pine and baking oranges in stockings, ribbon candy in dishes, Bing Crosby on the radio. You didn't need much, just lights, love, and the hope that everyone came home. Back then, ladies dressed to the nines just to pick up milk and eggs. Hats pinned just right, gloves white as snow, lipstick fresh. It wasn't about showing off, it was about self-respect. Even the corner grocer tipped his cap. You may have been rationing meat, but you didn't skimp on dignity. Not in town, and certainly not on a Saturday. Going to Sears wasn't a chore. It was a day out. You dressed up, grabbed the catalog just in case, and maybe even got a malt afterward. Whether you bought a wrench, a winter coat, or just wandered the aisles, it felt like visiting the big city. And if you made it to the escalator, you were fancy. Gas was 15 cents a gallon, but you couldn't just buy it too. Needed a stamp rationed like meat and sugar. Dad would grip the wheel and mutter about saving fuel, but Sunday drives still happened. You didn't go far, but it felt like freedom. There were windows on your street with blue stars, and a few with gold. You knew what that meant. Even as a kid, you didn't ask questions. You just walked quieter past those houses. Sometimes you'd catch a glance of a mother through the curtains, still and staring. That little star said everything without saying a word. Evenings meant gathering close around the radio. The glow of the dial lighting faces as FDR's voice filled the room. You didn't always understand the words, but you felt them. Calm, strong, steady. He spoke like a neighbor, not a president. You could hear a pin drop even from the kitchen. Folks leaned in because somehow his voice made everything feel just a little more bearable. That old tin can on the stove didn't hold bacon grease for frying eggs. It was wartime, and grease was gold. Mom saved it for the government, scraping every last bit in with a spoon. You'd watch it cool into something jelly-like, wondering how on earth it helped fight a war. But you didn't ask, you just helped scrape. And saluted the smell of breakfast doing its part. Out behind the house, rows of tomatoes stretched beside snap peas and marigolds, all part of your family's victory garden. It wasn't just about saving money, it was about doing your bit. You watered with care, picked with pride, and knew that every bite meant one less ration coupon. Even weeds got patriotic treatment. That little garden fed more than stomachs. It fed hope. When a new ration book arrived, you'd open it like a letter from the president himself. The paper had a stiff, metallic scent like coins and glue. Every stamp inside meant something real. Sugar, butter, shoes, you guarded it like treasure, and heaven help you if you tore one out early. That little booklet ran the household. Even kids knew not to lose it. Going to the movies wasn't just about cartoons and cowboy heroes. First came the newsreel. Grainy black and white film showed tanks rolling, flags rising, and battles far away. You'd sit tall, trying to understand what was happening overseas. It was history and Hollywood in one. Then came the cartoon, and the laughter returned. But not before everyone clapped for the news. You'd run barefoot through the alleyways, gravel underfoot, and summer heat in your hair. Houses were packed in close little boxes built before the war, painted dull green or white. You knew every shortcut, every neighbor's dog, and which fence you could hop. Streets weren't dangerous. They were home. The call for supper was your curfew, and the alley was your kingdom. You'd watch your dad shave slow and steady, standing at the mirror with a ceramic mug full of warm lather. He'd swirl that brush like he was painting a masterpiece, drag that straight razor along his jaw, and dab his face with a towel that smelled like Old Spice and steam. Nobody rushed it. That was his moment, and you stayed quiet to honor it. Church basements turned into knitting circles. Moms, grandmas, and even a few dads sat in folding chairs stitching socks and scarves for the boys overseas. You'd hear quiet murmurs, the clicking of needles, and maybe a prayer. Kids helped roll yarn or hold patterns. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Every stitch was a little hope tucked inside a duffel bag. Before refrigerators came around, you had the icebox and the Iceman. He knew every house on the route and every kid by name. You'd hear his truck rumble and sometimes score a chip of ice to suck on. He'd haul the block in with tongs, slide it into the chest, and nod like a hero. For 5 minutes, your kitchen was Alaska. You wore your older brother's shirts and your cousin's coat and didn't think twice. Fashion didn't mean much when the world was at war. Patches on the knees just meant it still had life. Moms hemmed and let out seams like it was an art. A dress wasn't old until it couldn't be fixed, and even then it became rags or doll clothes. At night, the distant sound of a train whistle carried across the fields. You'd lie in bed and wonder was your brother on that train. Your uncle, somebody's boy, surely. The sound was lonely and strong at once. It came and went like a ghost. And it always made you feel smaller and older at the same time. When sugar ran low, ingenuity kicked in. Cakes made with applesauce or mashed potatoes showed up at birthdays. You'd nod and chew and pretend it tasted just like the real thing. Mom smiled like a magician pulling sweetness from thin air. And sometimes it really did taste good. Wartime baking meant fewer complaints and more appreciation for anything sweet that made it to the plate. You didn't watch radio, you imagined it. The shadowy voices of Fibber McGee and Molly filled your head with full-blown worlds. A creaky door meant terror. A trumpet meant romance. Families sat still, eyes closed, soaking in the story like sunlight. It was a movie without a screen. And when it ended, you felt like you'd gone somewhere. No batteries, just magic waves in the air. Teachers wrote in perfect cursive. Every loop crisp, every tail tidy. Chalkboards weren't just tools. They were art shows. You'd get scolded for bad penmanship, not bad grammar. The smell of chalk dust stuck to your sweater, and you carried it home like a badge. Even now, you can probably still draw the whole alphabet in cursive, with that same stern voice in your ear. Recess wasn't just a break. It was a battle. Boys with buzz cuts, girls in pigtails, and everyone charging out to play jacks, Red Rover, or kick the can. You scraped knees, got grass-stained, and cried only if it really hurt. The bell always rang too soon. Then it was back to wooden desks and windows that never opened far enough. But recessed, that was freedom. Your neighbor's window had a Victory Bond poster in it, worn from the sun but still proud. Lady Liberty or Uncle Sam, printed in bold colors, stared out at the street. You didn't know how bonds worked, but you knew they mattered. Every time you walked past that window, it reminded you that even the quietest houses were helping win the war. The milkman came early. Glass bottles clinked against each other as he set them by the porch. Sometimes cream rose to the top, thick and pale. You'd fight your sibling for the first pour. A paper cap sealed it up. And if it was winter, the cream might push right out the top in a frozen curl. Cold, quiet, and dependable, like the man who delivered it. Before the papers hit the press, the newsboys were already yelling. Germany surrenders, they cried, running the sidewalks like town criers of old. Folks dropped coins, grabbed copies, and read aloud. Strangers hugged. Horns honked. You might not have understood every word, but you knew something had changed. That day, the whole town breathed out at once. The curtains were thick and dark blackout shades to keep enemy planes from spotting your house. You had air raid drills in school duck, under desks, or line up in the basement. Some kids thought it was a game, others didn't. The grown-ups didn't say much, but the radio talked about submarines offshore, and that was enough to keep you quiet.
A Sunday drive didn't need a destination. Dad packed everyone into the Ford Super Deluxe. Windows down. Your sister's elbowing your ribs. You roll through farmland, tiny towns, and sometimes just around the block. The world felt bigger and it moved past your window. No GPS, no music, just the hum of tires. And whatever thoughts came with the breeze. Movie stars weren't they? Just actors, they were royalty. Bogart, Paul, Cary Grant. They lived on the screen but felt like family. You clipped photos from magazines, mimicked their lines in the mirror, and swooned over headlines. They smoked, they smiled, they saved the world, at least in black and white. And when they walked down that screen, it felt like they were looking straight at you. At the five and dime, Yokobai chewing gum, hosiery, and a warbund. Sometimes all in one trip. A little booth with patriotic bunting sat by the register. Folks dropped their coins in like offerings, not purchases. You might not have had much money, but you knew it was going to something big. And that made $1 feel like a victory. Mums would quietly swap ration coupons at the corner store. Sugar for meat, coffee for butter. No fuss, no ledger, just a nod and a smile. Everyone understood. You helped who you could, and you never asked twice. It wasn't charity. It was just how folks got by when the shelves ran thin, and every dinner depended on a little neighborhood teamwork. Sometimes a soldier would show up at your door, sunburnt, half smiling, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. No warning, no phone call, just a knock. A ma'am? And suddenly supper was one plate short. You didn't ask what he'd seen. You just poured the coffee, handed him a clean towel, and thanked him like you meant it, because you did. Nano lunch pails weren't just for kids. They were for dads, too. Painted steel, dented corners, names scratched into the lid. Inside a sandwich. Maybe a pickle. Sometimes a note folded neat as a pocket square, whether you were off to the schoolyard or the factory floor. That lunch pail was your badge of daily life, and your lifeline till quitting time. You knew something was different when the church bells rang midweek. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, but for peace. Strangers cried, hugged, cheered. Radios blared. Windows flew open. Flags unfurled. The war was over. It didn't feel real at first. But when your neighbor handed you a bottle of soda and called you kid, you believed. Boys fiddled with wires, building crystal radios from scavenged parts. Girls clipped headlines, pictures, and letters for war scrapbooks that grew thicker every week. These weren't just hobbies. They were little shrines to a world bigger than Main Street. The static from a homemade radio or the crinkle of old newsprint felt like touching history before it even had a name. That old fan in the window clunked and rattled, but it moved just enough air to keep you sane on a July night. You'd sprawl on the floor with your arms out like a starfish, hoping for a breeze. Ceiling fans were rare. Air conditioning was a fantasy, and sweat, well, that was just part of summer living.
When Howdy Doody first aired in '48, half the block showed up to watch. One neighbor had a Philco the size of a bread box, black and white fuzz and all. Someone stood on the roof yelling, "Hold it there," while fiddling with the antenna. And when that goofy puppet appeared, we laughed like it was magic. Maybe it was. Oh, a pound of coffee went for 21 cents, and it wasn't weak either. Folks brewed it dark and strong enough to float a horseshoe. Dad used to say morning smelled like that pot bubbling on the stove. You didn't sip it. You braced yourself, took a swig, and got to work. No one called it artisan. It was just coffee. The grocer knew everybody's name and what cut of beef your mother preferred. He'd tuck a little something extra in the brown paper bag if times were tight. You didn't need a membership card, just a smile and a thank you. He kept the chalkboard up to date, the jokes corny, and the pickle barrel full. That was customer service. Wooden clothespins weren't just for laundry. Kids turned them into dolls, horses, even fighter planes. With a little paint and imagination, anything was possible. You could line them up on the windowsill like trophies. They weren't bought, they were made. And when they broke, you made more. Toys didn't come from a store. They came from the junk drawer. Letters took weeks to arrive and longer to write. Husbands folded them neat as uniforms. Wives sprayed perfume or pressed in a daisy. You read them slow-wise, sometimes more. The handwriting felt like a voice, the paper like a hug. Even the envelope mattered. It meant someone, somewhere, had stopped everything just to think of you. The soda fountain was everything. Milkshakes, gossip, first crushes, and shared fries with 2 straws. You slid onto a red stool, spun in circles, and ordered a cherry phosphate like it was fine wine. The jukebox played softly behind the clink of glass. If you were lucky, the waitress knew your name. And if you were luckier, so did your date. The newspaper hit the porch with a thunk that could wake the dog. Dad always got first crack, front page, then sports. You waited your turn for the comics. Everyone read something, even if it was just the want ads. News came printed, not pushed. And when it was bad, you didn't scroll past it. You sat with it. Fire escapes doubled as rooftops for dreaming. You'd sneak out there with a book or a soda, legs dangling over rusted rails. They weren't safe, but they were ours. Conversations floated up from the street. Distant radios hummed. The city breathed below. It was the kind of peace only found 3 stories above the noise. A new pair of nylons was like winning the lottery. Real ones not painted on seams. You'd show them off like a trophy. Careful not to snag them on anything sharper than a compliment. Stores kept them behind the counter. Ladies whispered when they found a pair. It wasn't vanity. It was victory in a war made of silk. Ceiling fans turned lazy circles above checkerboard tables at the corner store. You'd buy a nickel soda, sit down, and watch the world wander by. Sometimes the checker game never finished. Too many good stories, too many interruptions. But no one minded. The game was just the excuse to sit a while and stay human. The clerk would wrap your flour, beans, and soap in brown paper and tie it off with string. No plastic, no barcodes. It's just a pencil behind his ear and a scale that squeaked. You didn't throw those strings away either. You saved them in a drawer. Because you never knew when one would come in handy. Life magazine came in the mail and lived on the coffee table until every photo had been studied. War scenes, movie stars, inventions from the future. It was all there, bigger than life. You didn't skim, you absorbed. Even the ads felt exciting. Chalk drawings turned sidewalks into world's hopscotch lines. Treasure maps, even battle scenes with stick soldiers and exploding X's. You played until the chalk wore down to your knuckles. Then you borrowed someone else's. It all washed away in the rain, but that was fine. By tomorrow, it'll be back again. New stories in dusty white. Desks still had inkwells, though we didn't use them anymore. They held pencils, candy, marbles, whatever fit. Carved initials told stories from classes past. Some had gums stuck under them older than your teacher. The wood was scratched and polished by elbows in time. It creaked when you leaned on it. That desk knew more secrets than it should have. One phone in the house, usually in the hallway. Long cord. Rotary dial, no privacy. You'd say what needed saying and hang up. Someone was on the line, you waited or listened. Either way, it was a family event. And if you tied up the line too long, you got the look and maybe the broom. A candy bar cost 5 cents, and that nickel felt heavy with possibilities. You held it in your hand like treasure. Chocolate was rare during the war. But when it came back, oh boy, every bite was a celebration. You didn't wolf it down, you made it last. Even if it melted, it was still magic. Pants came with patches, sometimes sewn on before the knees even ripped. Nobody teased you for it. Everybody had them. Some were cut from old shirts, others from leftover curtains. They were colorful, lumpy, and a little itchy, but they told a story. You didn't throw things out, you fixed them. Clothes had a second life, just like people. The needle dropped on the Victrola, and the living room became a dance hall. You'd spin your sister or sway with your sweetheart, careful not to scuff the floor. The record crackled, the music floated, and even Grandpa tapped his foot. No one said, "Good old days." They just lived them, one slow two-step at a time. Mom fed shirts into the wringer washer like a machine operator on laundry duty. You'd watch with wide eyes, terrified your fingers might get caught if you helped. The clothes came out flat as pancakes, ready for the line. The whole house smelled like soap and sunshine. And if a storm rolled in, it was a full family scramble to rescue the sheets. Everyone knew the butcher, the barber, and his boy, because they'd all served in the same unit. Their uniforms were tucked away now, but the bond wasn't. You got your hair cut, picked up a roast, and heard the same story 3 ways. It wasn't gossip, it was hometown history, told in short sentences and long silences. The schoolhouse had 3 rooms, 1 bell, and a whole lot of character. You could hear that bell ring clear across the cornfields, and when it did, you ran. One teacher taught every grade and somehow kept order. Spitballs, spelling bees, and chalk dust filled the air. And recess meant jump rope, jacks, and someone getting their feelings hurt. The screen door creaked open just as the war news came on. Supper was on the stove. The air smelled like stew. And Dad turned the dial just in time to hear about some faraway place. You didn't understand it all, but you felt the weight in the room. No one talked much. Even the dog waited quiet. You'd read the comics out loud to your little brother, holding the paper open with both arms like a real reporter. He'd point at his favorite and giggle when you did the voices wrong. Dick Tracy, Little Orphan Annie, Gasoline Alley. They weren't just ink on paper. They were 10-minute vacations from rationing, chores, and serious faces. Nothing got thrown away. Not string, not foil, not paper. It all went into a drawer, a tin, or a box just in case. You never knew when the war effort might need it, or when Mom might need it to tie up a roast or wrap a birthday surprise. We didn't call it recycling. We called it being smart. The newsstand looked like it was about to burst. Collier's, the Saturday Evening Post, Liberty, True Detective, Cover Girls, war maps, cowboy tales, and family recipes. all stacked side by side. You didn't have to buy them to remember them. You just needed to stop, flip through a few pages, and get whisked away for 10 minutes. Lemonade stands weren't cute. They were serious business. A folding card table, a tin cup, and a sign your sister wrote in crooked letters. Real lemons, real sugar, no cutting corners. You made maybe a quarter, but you felt like a mogul. And when the neighbor paid a nickel and told you to keep the change, pure gold. The dentist's chair was metal and cold. The light was blinding. And the drill. It was powered by his foot. He'd pump like he was on a bicycle while saying, "Just a pinch," with a smile that didn't help. You gripped the armrest, tried not to breathe too hard, and promised yourself you'd never eat candy again until Friday. You didn't fully grasp what VE Day meant, but you knew it mattered. Flags waved in the school gym. Teachers smiled with teary eyes. And someone tried to explain it without scaring the little ones. All you knew was something big had ended. And the grown-ups looked lighter. For once, the world felt like it might be okay. Kids dragged wagons full of pots, bent pans, and old bed springs to the town square. It was the scrap drive. And it felt important. You didn't know what happened to the stuff once it left, but you knew it helped. Even your dad's busted rake got tossed in, and everyone cheered like it had just won a medal. Cold mornings meant huddling near the stove, your hands outstretched, your feet tapping on cold floors. The kindling snapped, the flame danced. And someone always argued over who got the warmest spot. You got dressed in a rush, still shivering. But there was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. Just heat, wood, and routine. Fantasia wasn't just a movie. It was an experience. The music was thunder. The colors were wild. Oh, and that broomstick scene, it haunted you for a week. You sat in the dark theater with a jaw full of popcorn and eyes the size of saucers. Disney didn't feel like cartoons anymore. It felt like magic. That might be real. You didn't just dial a number. You talked to the operator. "Number, please," she'd say. And somehow she already knew your aunt lived on Maple Street. Sometimes she connected you fast. Sometimes she chatted first. It was like having a telephone and a nosy neighbor rolled into one. It was just how things worked. Library books had cards in the front and a date stamped in red. You handed them to the librarian, who barely spoke above a whisper, but somehow terrified you anyway. The shelves were dusty. The pages were yellowing, and the silence felt holy. You didn't have to love reading. You just had to respect the hush. The first time someone brought home Tupperware, everyone stared like it had landed from space. You pressed the lid, it made a funny burp, and suddenly leftovers were more exciting than dinner. Mom called it a miracle. Dad said it was witchcraft. Either way, it went right into the cupboard next to the chipped china and the real miracles. A pocket knife wasn't just a tool, it was a legacy. Grandpa gave it to Dad, who gave it to you with barely a word. The blade had scratches. The hinge was stiff, and it smelled faintly of old tobacco. You didn't need a ceremony. You just slipped it in your pocket and felt about 3 inches taller. Dresses made from flour sacks weren't a sign of hardship. They were creativity on full display. The prints were floral, the buttons were mismatched, and the stitching was all Mom's. Some even came with little butterflies or polka dots, if you were lucky. No one laughed, because half the class wore them too. It was fashion born of grit. Remember Pearl Harbor wasn't just a phrase, it was a feeling. Someone would say it softly, and the room would go still. You didn't need to ask what they were remembering. You could see it in their eyes. Respect, grief, pride, and a silent promise to never forget. Even when the world kept moving on. The kitchen floor was linoleum worn, faded, and soft in spots from years of cooking, dancing, and waiting. It creaked in winter and curled in the corners. You could trace every scuff mark to a story, a dropped plate, a spilled pot, a puppy's first bath. It wasn't fancy, but it was where everything real happened. Mom's iron hissed like a steam engine as she pressed shirts in the sunlight. The board creaked, the cord stretched, and the rhythm never broke. She didn't complain, just moved from collar to sleeve with quiet precision. And when you wore that crisp shirt to church or school, it felt like her hands were still smoothing you down. Milkshakes weren't something you drank, they were something you conquered. Thick enough to bend your straw, cold enough to freeze your teeth. They came in tall metal cups you couldn't quite finish. You'd sit at the soda counter, swinging your feet, trying not to spill a drop. That last slurp at the bottom, pure triumph. Posters saying "Loose lips sink ships" were everywhere. School walls, post offices, even church halls. They didn't need to explain it. You just knew. Talk too much, and someone might not come home. It was a strange mix of fear and patriotism, wrapped in bold letters and dark colors. And somehow, it stuck with you. You needed a church key just to open a soda bottle, and there was always one hanging on a nail by the door. That sharp crack of metal against glass meant a reward was coming. No twist-off caps, no fancy carbonation tricks. Just a cold bottle and a foam mustache if you weren't careful on the first sip. The first time someone handed you a ballpoint pen, it felt like something out of science fiction. No ink pot, no mess. Just smooth, endless lines. You clicked it in and out a dozen times just to hear the sound. It cost more than it should have. But boy, did it feel like the future had arrived in your shirt pocket. You walked to the movie theater barefoot in the summer, the sidewalk warm under your feet, and the ticket man waving you through with a smile. It didn't matter what was playing. You came for the popcorn, the fans spinning overhead, and the cartoons that made everyone laugh. Even the old-timers in the back row. The root cellar smelled like cold dirt and onions, but it was where the smart ones stored everything, from canned peaches to pickled beets. It kept things cool before refrigerators took over. You'd lift the heavy wooden door and step into a quiet stillness that somehow made you whisper, even when you were alone. Quilts weren't just warm, they told stories. Every square came from something, a dress, a curtain, a cousin's old shirt. Grandma stitched them by hand, sometimes humming, sometimes talking about folks you never met. You'd trace the seams with your fingers and fall asleep wondering what secrets were buried in the fabric. Opening a box of Cracker Jack was always a gamble. You didn't care about the snack. You were after the prize. A plastic ring or tiny toy was a treasure. A paper puzzle or sticker, a disappointment. But you still smiled, because the box crinkled just right, and your fingers always smelled like caramel after. Ironing boards were more battlefield than appliance. Grandmas had scorch marks from tricks she swore worked better than new gadgets. A sprinkle of water here, a swipe of soap there. She had her own rhythm. You'd watch her glide the iron like it was part of her arm, the smell of hot cotton filling the kitchen. Those old roller skates strapped right over your shoes, with buckles that pinched and metal wheels that sang on the sidewalk. You'd wobble down the street with scraped knees and a grin, dodging sidewalk cracks, pretending you were in a race. If one broke mid-glide, you limped home and begged Dad for his wrench, because that's just how life worked back then. You didn't toss things, you fixed them, you made do, and you kept on rolling. Do you remember your first pair of skates? Or that one thing you refused to throw away because it meant something? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your stories. And just like that, as the 1940s slowly faded into memory, a new decade stood waiting on the doorstep. The war was over. America was rebuilding. Hope was in the air. And families were dreaming bigger than ever before. We're stepping into the world of soda fountains, chrome diners, rock and roll, and the birth of suburbia. The 1950s are calling, and we're taking you there next. So stay with us, because the journey through America's golden memories is just getting started. In 1950, the average American house cost about $7,400 to $7,500 a day, and it wasn't a shoebox either. You got a full yard, real wood floors, and neighbors who knew your name. Today, that wouldn't even cover the down payment on a used shed in most cities. In 1955, a gallon of gas cost 29 cents. That meant $5 filled your tank and left enough change for a Coke and a pack of gum. And you didn't pump it yourself? A young guy cleaned your windshield while calling you sir. The Chevy Bel Air hit the streets in '55 and turned heads everywhere it went. Two-tone paint, chrome trim, V8 engine. It looked fast, just sitting still. Owning one wasn't just driving. It was showing the world you were doing all right. In 1952, Mr. Potato Head became the first toy ever advertised on television. Back then, you had to supply your own real potato. The plastic spud came later. Imagine handing a modern kid a raw potato and saying, "Here, play with this." In 1950, the U.S. population was just over 150 million, less than half of what it is today. Towns were smaller. Streets were quieter. And you could actually recognize most of the faces at the grocery store. You didn't lock your doors in the 50s, not because crime didn't exist, but because folks trusted each other. If someone knocked, you invited them in. If they didn't knock, it was probably your cousin bringing back your ladder. Nobody worried. It was just different. Sunday dinner wasn't optional. The whole family showed up. Grandparents, cousins, the noisy uncle who told the same story every week. Roast beef, mashed potatoes. Jell-O mold no one liked, but everyone took a scoop of anyway. It wasn't about food. It was about time. Drive-in theaters were at their peak in the 50s. You pulled up in your car, hooked the speaker onto your window, and watched a double feature under the stars. If you were lucky, the snack bar popcorn wasn't burnt. And maybe, just maybe, she held your hand. The TV dinner was invented in 1953. It came in a foil tray, cost 98 cents, and promised a full meal with 0 dishes. Families loved it. No one called it processed food. Back then, it was just convenient and kind of exciting. In 1954, the first color TV went on sale. But they were expensive, about $1,000. That's nearly $10,000 today. Most folks stuck with black and white. And when someone in the neighborhood did get a color set, half the block came over. The interstate highway system didn't exist until Eisenhower signed it into law in 1956. Before that, road trips were a real gamble. You needed paper maps, extra tires, and patience. And if your car broke down in the middle of nowhere, well, hope you packed sandwiches. Elvis Presley released his first single, "That's All Right," in 1954. Back then, some folks thought his dancing was scandalous. Too much hip, not enough gospel. But for teenagers, he was electric. He didn't just sing. He shook up the whole country, one vinyl at a time. Milk came in glass bottles on your front step, delivered by the milkman in the early morning. You heard the clink of bottles and knew the day was starting. And if you were lucky, Mom let you peel the little paper lid off before breakfast. Every kid had a red radio flyer wagon, or wanted one, that hauled everything. Toys, pets, groceries, siblings, whatever. And when it rained, you flipped it over and turned it into a pirate ship, a fort, or a turtle shell. Imagination was the only upgrade. The average American family had one car, one TV, and one bathroom. And somehow, everyone made it work. Siblings fought over the remote, well, the dial. And taking turns wasn't optional. It was just part of growing up. The average annual salary in 1950 was around $3,200. And guess what? That actually went a long way. You could buy a home, raise a family, and still have a vacation once a year, even if it was just to grandma's place. School lunches in the 50s weren't pizza pockets and chocolate milk. You got meatloaf, peas, a scoop of mashed potatoes, and a tiny carton of milk. And you ate it without complaining. Because the lunch lady looked like she bench-pressed sacks of flour for fun. In the early 1950s, television antennas popped up on rooftops across the country. Families climbed onto the garage with a wrench and a prayer, trying to aim it just right. One turn to Ferrand, you got static. Just right. Crystal clear, I Love Lucy. If your mom needed bread in the 1950s, she didn't check an app. She sent you. Grocery stores were small, neighborhood, and everyone knew your name. You handed the clerk $1, got a loaf of bread, some milk, and change back. In 1950, most TVs had screens the size of a dinner plate and weighed as much as a small refrigerator. No remote, no pause button. If you wanted to change the channel, you had to get up, and Dad always made you do it. The first Waffle House opened in 1955 in Georgia. It was tiny, cheap, and open 24/7. Truckers, teenagers, and early risers all found a home at the counter. It didn't matter who you were. If you liked waffles and coffee, you had a seat. In 1953, the first successful open-heart surgery using a heart-lung machine was performed. It sounded like science fiction, stopping the heart, fixing it, and starting it again. But it worked. And it changed what doctors believed was possible. House keys were shared with neighbors. Going out of town, you gave yours to the Johnsons next door so they could feed the cat. No alarms, no cameras, just trust. And maybe a pie waiting on the counter when you got back. Kids in the 1950s played outside. No phones, no tablets, no Wi-Fi. Just stickball bikes and coming home when the streetlights flicked on. You knew every kid on your block, and somehow nobody ever got bored. Coca-Cola still came in glass bottles, and the vending machines only took nickels. You slid the bottle out of the cooler, popped the cap, and that first sip practically burned. Cold, fizzy, perfect. No plastic. No zero sugar. Just the real deal. In the 50s, your phone was a rotary dial mounted to the wall. If you messed up dialing the last number, you had to start over. Long-distance calls were a big deal, and if the neighbor picked up on the party line, well, so much for privacy. You didn't need a gym membership in the 1950s. Chores took care of that. Mowing the lawn with a push mower, chopping wood for the stove, hanging laundry outside, hauling water. That was your workout, and somehow your grandpa still had better calves than you. Back then, you dressed up to fly. Men wore suits, women wore gloves. Flying wasn't just transportation, it was an event. You got real meals, legroom, and smiles from the stewardess. No one showed up in sweatpants. And no one tried to bring a goat on board. A man's toolbox was a badge of honor. Heavy steel, no labels. Just years of grease and know-how. You didn't throw things out, you fixed them. And if your neighbor's mower broke, you didn't call someone. You walked over and helped. Polio was still a real fear in the early 1950s. Kids were told not to swim in public pools during outbreaks. Then, in '55, Jonas Salk's vaccine came out. And it was like the whole country let out a breath it had been holding for years. If your family had a station wagon, you were living good. You piled in the back without seatbelts, windows down, dog drooling in the wind. Dad shouting over the radio, and Mom passing sandwiches back from a cooler. It wasn't fancy, but it was freedom. The neighborhood barber shop was where stories were told. Hair was cut. And secrets were half-whispered under the buzz of clippers. You didn't need Yelp. You needed Lou, the guy who'd been cutting your hair since Eisenhower got elected, and still charged $2. There was no GPS. If you got lost, you stopped and asked for directions. And someone actually helped you, usually with a pencil and a napkin. You trusted strangers, and somehow they didn't steer you wrong. Just for laughs. When the ice cream truck rolled down the street, kids didn't just smile. They sprinted barefoot, quarters in hand, screaming for bomb pops and drumsticks. No one cared about sugar content. Just that first bite, half melted, sun on your face, and sticky fingers all afternoon. Back then, high school shop class meant you actually learned something useful. Welding, woodwork, engines, the good stuff. You didn't just graduate with a diploma. You left knowing how to fix a lawnmower, build a table, and patch a hole in the roof if needed. In 1951, the first nuclear power plant went online in Idaho. It didn't light up a city just for light bulbs, but it was the spark of something massive. America believed the future was atomic, and somehow that was both exciting and terrifying. Toasters, blenders, waffle irons. In the 1950s, these weren't just kitchen tools. They were shiny symbols of progress. Chrome, everything. Your appliances looked like they belonged in a spaceship. And if something broke, Dad opened it up and fixed it with a screwdriver and grit. Back then, kids didn't wear helmets when they rode bikes. No elbow pads, no foam suits. Just scabby knees and streamers on the handlebars. You crashed, you limped home. And your mom slapped on iodine like it was holy water. And somehow, you survived. Television signed off at night around midnight. The screen would go black after the national anthem. No late-night shows. No infomercials. Just static. That was your cue to hit the hay. Or risk Dad waking up and yelling, "Turn that damn thing off." In the 1950s, car keys were optional. Many pickups didn't even have door locks. You parked, left the keys under the visor, and nobody touched it. Today you need a password to start your microwave. Back then, trust was stronger than tech. If you got sick in the 50s, you didn't Google it. You called the family doctor, and he actually came to your house. With a black bag, a thermometer, and a look that said, "I've seen worse." And somehow, his presence made you feel better already. Penny candy actually cost a penny. Tootsie Rolls, Mary Janes, bubble gum all lined up behind the counter in big glass jars. You handed over 5 cents and walked out like a king. It wasn't just the sugar. It was the thrill of choice. At home, the thermostat didn't change much. You put on a sweater in winter, opened a window in summer, and complained exactly once before Dad said, "It builds character." And you believed him? Because you didn't want to be called soft in front of your siblings. Sunday morning radio was for gospel and news. No scrolling, no playlists. Just voices on the air and the sound of bacon frying in the background. Dad read the paper, Mom made coffee, and the world felt slow, in the best possible way. In the 1950s, most milk, butter, and meat came from nearby farms. Grocery stores didn't need 20 brands of everything, just one that worked. And nobody asked if something was organic. It was. That's just how food was supposed to be. Cigarette ads were everywhere. On TV, in magazines, even at the doctor's office. Some brands even claimed to be good for digestion. It sounds crazy now, but back then, lighting up was just part of life. Even your boss smoked at his desk. Kids respected their teachers, or at least feared their rulers. Discipline wasn't up for debate. You stood when called on, said yes, ma'am, and you didn't talk back. Unless you wanted your ears boxed and a note sent home, which you did not want. You didn't throw things out. You fixed them. Radios got new tubes. Shoes got new soles. Toasters got rewired. There was pride in keeping things running. Not because you were cheap, but because you could. And when something finally broke for good, you mourned it. A man with a briefcase and a hat was just part of the morning scenery. He kissed his wife goodbye, caught the 8:15 train, and worked downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And every evening he came home like clockwork, tired but proud. The Jell-O salad was in its prime. Lime Jell-O with cottage cheese, fruit suspended in midair like it defied gravity. Maybe some shredded carrots tossed in for texture. Nobody liked it, but everyone ate it. Because it was polite, and, well, it was just tradition. When neighbors had a baby, everyone showed up with a casserole and a hand-me-down crib. No baby registries, no online wish lists. Just people helping people. The new dad was expected to hand out cigars, and the new mom didn't leave the house for a week. Roller skates had metal wheels that sounded like thunder on the sidewalk. You tightened them with a skate key that hung on a string around your neck. And if your toe clip broke mid-ride, you walked home barefoot with bloodied socks and a big smile. Every diner had a jukebox, either at the table or by the door. Drop in a dime, pick a number, and watch the gears whir to life. Chuck Berry, Patti Page, Buddy Holly came crackling through the speakers. And suddenly, the whole booth went quiet. Paperboys were real hustlers, up at dawn, slinging heavy canvas bags over one shoulder, tossing papers with terrifying accuracy. Rain or shine, no excuses. And if you wanted to make money as a kid in the 50s, you didn't stream or sell candy bars. You delivered. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite ever sent into space. It was the size of a beach ball, and it scared the hell out of America. Suddenly, the space race was on, and kids in the U.S. started hearing the word science a lot more at school. The average movie ticket in 1950 cost just 48 cents. For under $1, you got a seat, popcorn, and maybe a cartoon before the film. You didn't pre-book. You didn't scroll through trailers. You just showed up and picked whatever was playing. And it was usually great. In 1953, DNA's double helix structure was discovered by Watson and Crick. Most folks didn't understand what it meant at the time, but it would go on to change science, medicine, and even solve crimes decades later. Back then, it was just a strange thing in a science journal. You could buy a brand new Ford F-100 in the early 1950s for under $1,500. No touchscreens, no Bluetooth. Just steel, an AM radio, and a bench seat wide enough to fit 3 grown men and a dog. And if you broke it, you fixed it yourself. The Korean War began in 1950 and lasted until 1953. Over 1.7 million Americans served. It wasn't talked about as much as World War II, but it changed thousands of families forever. For many veterans, it was a brutal, cold, uphill fight, and one they rarely spoke about afterward. Most American homes didn't have air conditioning in the 1950s. You cooled off with a fan, a cold glass of lemonade, and a nap on the porch. And if it got really hot, you slept in the basement. Nobody complained. It was just part of summer. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a movie star. She was the movie star. In 1955, she founded her own production company. Rare for a woman at that time. To some, she was a blonde bombshell. But behind the scenes, she was sharp, ambitious, and didn't play by Hollywood's rules. Most homes had one bathroom, and it was usually pink, mint green, or baby blue. The toilet, the tile, all pastel. And if you had 3 kids in one tub, bath night was a military operation. Oldest first, youngest last, same water. In 1958, the microchip was invented. At the time, no one outside a lab cared much, but it laid the groundwork for computers, phones, and just about everything we use today. Back then, people were still more amazed by the automatic garage door. American Bandstand debuted nationally in 1957, hosted by a clean-cut guy named Dick Clark. Teens danced in saddle shoes and poodle skirts while parents frowned from the kitchen. It wasn't just a music show. It shaped what cool looked like across the whole country. If you wanted to cool off in the summer, you didn't head to a luxury gym, you went to the community pool, if your town had one. Chlorine strong enough to bleach your hair, lifeguards with zero patience, and somehow, every kid still cannonballed right into the deep end. In 1958, the hula hoop hit store shelves and sold 25 million units in just 4 months. Kids spun plastic rings in driveways, parks, and schoolyards until they were dizzy. Neighborhood contests popped up overnight, and parents secretly tried it after dark, usually throwing out their backs with a smile. Homemade ice cream wasn't just a treat. It was an event. You poured in rock salt, cranked that heavy metal handle until your arms gave out, and prayed it set right. And when it finally did, it's the coldest, creamiest thing you ever tasted. Nothing from a store could touch it. Rock and roll didn't just appear, it exploded. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis, they didn't sound like anything else on the radio. Parents panicked, preachers warned. And teenagers, they cranked it louder. For the first time, music felt dangerous. In a fun way, you didn't buy furniture from websites in the 50s. You went to local department stores, sat on every couch, and probably got offered a cup of coffee. The guy who sold it to you lived 2 streets over, and if something broke, he'd help fix it. McDonald's had just started franchising in the 1950s. The original menu had 9 items, including a 15-cent hamburger and 10-cent fries. No apps, no delivery. You walked up to a window, paid in coins, and ate your burger on the hood of your car, and it was perfect. House calls from salesmen were common. Vacuums, encyclopedias, brushes, you name it. These guys wore suits, smiled big, and gave live demos in your living room. Sometimes mom bought something. Sometimes she didn't, but she always offered them coffee. It was just the polite thing to do. In 1959, Hawaii became the 50th state. For many Americans, it felt exotic and far off. Beaches, volcanoes, hula skirts, suddenly, postcards from paradise started showing up in mailboxes across the country. It was America's newest state, and everyone wanted to visit. Typewriters clacked away in every office, school, and home study. You messed up, you used whiteout, or just started over. And there was nothing quite like the sound of someone hitting return, that loud ding and slide that meant they were in the zone. On Halloween night, kids didn't buy costumes. They made them. Old bedsheets, cardboard robots, soot on the face for a cowboy beard. You walked from house to house with a pillowcase. No parents in sight, just kids, candy, and a night that felt like magic. In the 1950s, TVs didn't come with stands. They were the furniture. Big wooden cabinets with built-in legs and speaker cloth fronts. When it broke, Dad didn't throw it away. He called the repairman, who'd show up with a toolbox and a cigarette. Men wore hats. Not for fashion, because that's just what you did. Fedoras, flat caps, even pork pies. You put it on before leaving the house, tipped it when you greeted someone, and took it off indoors. It was automatic, no one questioned it. Women curled their hair with metal rollers and dried it under giant helmet dryers that looked like something from a sci-fi movie. Salons smelled like hairspray, perm solution, and gossip. It wasn't just about looks, it was a place to talk. In 1957, a little-known author named Dr. Seuss released The Cat in the Hat. It was written with only 236 different words to help kids learn to read. It didn't just become a hit, it turned storytime into something fun, wild, and unforgettable. Postcards were a big deal. Every trip, even just 2 towns over, meant grabbing a postcard and sending it back home. They cost a few cents and carried a simple message, thinking of you. People saved them like souvenirs. Some still do. Bank hours were strict. If you didn't get there by 3 p.m. Friday, you were broke until Monday. No ATMs, no apps. It's just a passbook, a teller behind glass, and the sound of that mechanical stamp punching your deposit into history. In 1955, Disneyland opened in California. Walt Disney himself walked the grounds on opening day. There were only 18 rides, and the park had major hiccups, including a plumber strike and melted asphalt. But still, it became the happiest place on earth. School desks had inkwells, even though most kids were already using ballpoint pens. the holes stayed anyway, like little fossils from the past. You'd poke your pencil through them during math and wonder how anyone ever wrote with an actual feather and ink. Church on Sunday wasn't a maybe. It was the anchor of the week. Families dressed up, kids sat still mostly. And after the service, everyone shook hands and headed home for roast chicken. It wasn't just religion. It was routine. It held the week together. Encyclopedias were how you looked things up. A salesman would come to your door with a full set of Britannica, and your parents would pay in monthly installments. If you needed to write a school report, that big shelf of books was the internet. In the 50s, lunchboxes were metal and built to survive a schoolyard war. Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, or Howdy Doody on the side. And inside, a bologna sandwich, an apple, and maybe a thermos of milk. No one traded their lunch unless it had Oreos. The first credit card as we know it, diners. Club launched in 1950. It started as a way for businessmen to pay for meals without cash. By the end of the decade, more folks were signing up and forgetting to read the fine print. In 1951, the first coast-to-coast live television broadcast aired. President Truman spoke from the White House, and folks across the country watched it happen at the same time. It was the start of a new kind of connection. One screen, one nation, one moment. Yard games were everything. Horseshoes, jacks, marbles, jump rope, and lawn darts. The metal kind. The ones that could skewer a foot if you weren't careful. Kids didn't need instructions. They made up the rules as they went and played until dark. Canned food was king. Spam, condensed soup, and canned fruit cocktail with one lonely cherry. Housewives stocked pantries like mini fallout shelters, quick, cheap, and shelf-stable. It wasn't gourmet, but it fed a family of 5 on one paycheck. And a lot of casseroles. In 1951, direct dial long-distance phone calls became possible for the first time. No operator needed. Before that, if you wanted to call across the country, you had to ask a live person to connect you. With direct dial, suddenly coast to coast felt a little closer. Car interiors were metal, not plastic. If you left your Chevy in the sun, the steering wheel could fry an egg. And the seat springs? They left stripes on your legs. No cup holders, no airbags. Just raw steel, sticky vinyl, and a whole lot of attitude. In 1952, the first barcode patent was granted. It looked like a bullseye. Nobody had scanners yet, but the idea of machines reading products. Pure science fiction. It took another 20 years to catch on, but it started with a doodle and a dream in a 1950s lab. Most homes had one phone number, one corded phone, and zero privacy. If it rang, you ran for it. And if your teenage daughter stayed on the line too long, everyone knew. There was no voicemail. There was just hoping they called back. Sidewalk chalk wasn't bought in fancy packs. You made it with whatever white rock you could find. Driveways turned into racetracks, hopscotch grids, and masterpieces that washed away with the first summer rain, and nobody needed instructions. You just drew. Every town had a local soda fountain or lunch counter. You sat on a red stool, ordered a cherry Coke or a grilled cheese, and spun in circles, while the waitress yelled your name like she'd known you for years, because she probably had. It wasn't about convenience or speed or going viral. It was about knowing people, trusting them, helping them, laughing with them, and missing them when they moved away. America in the 1950s wasn't perfect, but it was personal. And in a world moving faster every year, maybe that's the thing we miss the most. But now, we're heading into the 1960s, a decade of change, color, and revolution. So stay with us, because next, we're diving into 100 forgotten things from 1960s America. What do you remember most about the 50s? Did any of these memories spark something deep inside you? Or maybe you've only heard these stories from your parents or grandparents. Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your favorite memories, forgotten treasures, or what surprised you the most. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter in our American time capsule. The 1960s are just around the corner. Let's go there together. And now, we're rolling into the 1960s, a decade of bold style, big dreams, and the kind of memories that still make you smile. You already know how special it was, but let's take a moment to feel it again. Back then, the average house cost around $15,000. Can you imagine? It still felt like a mountain, but you could raise a family on one income, mow the lawn on Saturdays, and know your neighbors by name. The white picket fence dream actually came with a front porch and a working doorbell. A gallon of gas cost around 30 cents, and that wasn't on sale. That was normal. You'd pull into the station, and an attendant in a cap would fill it up. Check your oil, clean your windshield, and maybe even hand you a free map. No credit cards, no touch screens. Just coins, a nod, and a smile. You saw them everywhere. Parked at the diner, idling at red lights, or rumbling through suburbia. Then the Ford Mustang hit the streets in '64, and suddenly every teenager had a poster of one. It wasn't just a car. It was freedom on four wheels. And if you knew someone who had one, you never forgot it. The average U.S. salary in the 1960s hovered around $7,000 a year. It wasn't much, but it stretched. One income fed the whole house, filled the gas tank, and maybe even paid for a summer vacation. You didn't feel rich, but you didn't feel like you were falling behind either. Summer camp was bug spray, bunk beds, and that one counselor with a guitar who only knew 2 chords. You'd write postcards home that said, "Having fun," even if you cried the first night. And somehow, the mosquito bites, the cafeteria mystery meat, and the campfire songs stuck with you forever. The milkman brought fresh glass bottles to your doorstep. Before you ever worried about expiration dates, you'd hear the clink of bottles before breakfast was even on the table. And if you were lucky, he left chocolate milk too, a little surprise that made your morning feel like Christmas. Watching the moon landing live meant crowding around a tiny black and white TV with fuzzy reception and rabbit ears. Nobody blinked. Neil Armstrong's voice crackled through the static, and for one brief second, the entire country felt like it was sitting in the same living room, holding its breath. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just news. It was a knot in your stomach. People kept radios close and looked at the sky a little longer. Schools practiced duck and cover. And for a few long days in October 1962, the world felt like it was holding its breath too. Back then, cameras had flashbulbs you had to replace after every shot. They'd pop, sizzle, and get hot. You carried a little pack of extras, like they were ammo. Family gatherings meant blinding everyone 5 times in a row, just to be sure one picture turned out. When the Beatles showed up on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was like a switch flipped. The hair, the screaming, the way girls clutched their chests like they'd seen the future. And maybe they had. For one night, every living room in America became a concert hall, with a tiny black and white stage and a sound that shook the walls. Seatbelts. We didn't know her. The back of the station wagon was a rolling playground. Blankets, toys, maybe a loose dog or 2. No one wore a belt, and somehow we survived. We bounced with every bump in the road, eating snacks and fighting over who got the window seat. Hanging clothes outside was just what you did. Lines stretched across backyards, and every home had a basket of pins. Sheets flapped in the breeze. Towels dried stiff as boards, but they smelled like sunshine. You didn't need a dryer to feel clean. Lucy wasn't just a rerun. She was family. You knew the episode. You knew the chocolate factory, the grape stomp, the scheming. But you still laughed, because it wasn't about the plot. It was about comfort. About hearing that same intro jingle and feeling at home. Every kid had at least one Viewmaster reel. You'd click through 3D images of national parks, cartoon characters, or Disney scenes. That little red viewer transported you, click by click. Two places you'd only ever heard about. And sometimes you'd flip through the whole thing twice just for fun. When Walter Cronkite came on the TV, the room went quiet. You didn't argue with him. You listened. He wore the same suit every night, looked straight into the camera, and just told you what happened. No yelling. No drama, just facts. And somehow, that was enough. Every neighborhood had a barbershop with the striped red pole spinning outside. Inside, checkerboard floors, leather chairs, and a radio that never changed stations. Men talked politics, baseball, and local gossip while getting a trim. No appointments. Just wait your turn and catch up on the town. 8mm home movies were how you saved birthdays, vacations, and backyard moments. You'd drag out the screen, thread the reel just right, and dim the lights. The film would stutter, go silent, and suddenly everyone was laughing at themselves in grainy, jittery slow motion. Pong hadn't arrived yet, but pinball machines stood tall in arcades, diners, and bowling alleys. You didn't need graphics, just flashing lights, loud bells, and a steady flipper hand. Dropping into nickels felt like unlocking a world where high scores mattered more than report cards. Aluminum ice trays were medieval. You had to lift that cold metal lever with both hands, praying the cubes wouldn't launch across the kitchen. And when they finally popped out, it was loud enough to scare the dog. But somehow, those cubes felt colder than anything from a modern fridge. You wore saddle shoes until they practically talked back at you. You'd scuff them up before class, then spend recess rubbing white polish back on. They were always just uncomfortable enough to notice, but never bad enough to leave at home. Everybody had a pair, whether they liked them or not. Typing class was an orchestra of chaos. Heavy keys, loud clicks, and fingers stained with ribbon ink. You'd mess up one letter and have to start all over. And if you forgot to hit return at the end of the line, the whole thing went sideways. Polaroids were magic spells. You'd press the button, hear that buzz, and then wait and wait and wait. Someone always said, "Shake it." Like that helped. When the picture finally appeared, it felt like proof you existed. You stuck it on the fridge or lost it forever in a drawer. You could feed a vending machine a couple of coins and actually get something worth eating. A cold soda, a pack of gum, maybe even a sandwich if you were brave. No touchscreen. No card reader. Buttons that barely worked and snacks that always got stuck one row too high. Back then, it really felt like America was going somewhere. There was a sense of motion, of space, of highways, ideas, hope. It wasn't perfect, but people believed in better, in progress, in possibility. And when you looked around, you actually felt like you were part of it. The ice cream truck didn't just play a jingle, it announced summer. You'd hear that tiny melody from 5 blocks away, scream for change, and sprint barefoot across burning sidewalks. The menu never changed, but the joy never wore off. Bomb pops tasted better when you earned them by running. In school, duck and cover drills were treated like spelling tests. You'd crawl under your desk, cover your neck, and pretend you were safe from nuclear fire. Nobody questioned it. It was just another Tuesday. The scariest part wasn't the drill. It was how normal it felt. Metal lunchboxes were built like tanks. You had your favorite show or comic plastered on the front, and a thermos inside that always smelled vaguely of milk. No matter what was in it, the latch always broke. The handle always cracked. But you carried it every day like it was armor. Before cartoons were called content, we had Howdy Doody, Captain Kangaroo, and Hopalong Cassidy. The puppets were strange, the sets were simple, and the jokes were older than dirt. But we didn't care. It felt like they were talking directly to you, and that made all the difference. You walked to school. No app. No map, no adult supervision. Just a backpack, a jacket, and instructions to come straight home. Most of us didn't. We took the long way, stopped at the corner store, and made it back by dinner like nothing ever happened. The record player was sacred. That click, the soft hiss, then the music. Every party, every Saturday, every heartbreak. The soundtrack came from vinyl. You learned which 45 skipped, and how to fix them with a coin. Nobody threw on background noise. You listened. Plastic rain bonnets folded into neat little squares and lived at the bottom of every mom's purse. The sky would cloud over and boom, out came the bonnet like a superhero cape. It wasn't flattering, but it worked. And somehow, you never questioned why every woman had one. You didn't just flip channels, you fought the TV. One person held the rabbit ears while the other shouted, "Right there. No, back, now let go." You'd jam tinfoil on top and pray the picture stayed still. When it worked, it felt like you'd won a war. Streetlights were the clock. When they came on, you knew it was time to head home. No matter how good the game was, bikes screeched to a halt. Kids vanished like ghosts. And moms leaned out the door with one word. Now we didn't argue. We just knew. TV didn't go all night. When the last show ended, a flag waved on screen while the national anthem played. Then static. That meant bedtime or time to read, or stare at the test pattern like it held secrets. It didn't, but it still felt oddly important. You could actually buy candy with pennies. You'd walk into the corner store with a handful of coins and come out with a tiny brown paper bag full of wax bottles, candy buttons, and maybe a jawbreaker that lasted 3 recesses. Sugar was freedom, and no one asked about ingredients. The encyclopedias came in the mail. You didn't Google things. You waited 6 to 8 weeks for Volume G salesmen knocked on your door with promises of smarter kids and polished sets of gold-lettered knowledge. And when they finally arrived, they lived on the living room shelf like royalty. Soda didn't fizz the same unless it came in a glass bottle. And those bottles had to be opened with a mounted opener. The one stuck to your garage wall. You'd line up the caps on the workbench like trophies. No twist-offs. You had to work for the good stuff. Back then, banks didn't just want your money. They bribed you with kitchen appliances. Open a savings account and walk out with a toaster, a blender, or a full set of glasses. It was weird. It was wonderful. And honestly, the toasters were better than the interest. The whole house stopped when Bonanza came on, or Gunsmoke, or Andy Griffith. Westerns were everywhere. So were laugh tracks. Families watched together, not in silence, but in little bursts of commentary. He's gonna get it. That guy's no good. Turn it up. It was the sound of the living room breathing. The smell of fresh mimeograph paper hit like a wave. Warm, inky, with that unmistakable purple writing. Teachers handed them out, and half the class lifted them to their noses like they were holding magic. No one knew why it smelled so good. It just did. Lunch from home meant a paper bag and a sandwich slightly flattened by books. Bologna and mustard, chips in a wax paper wrap, an apple, and maybe a cookie. If someone remembered, you'd trade snacks under the desk like it was a stock exchange. You knew the slideshow was coming when the lights dimmed and the projector clicked on. The first clunk of the trio unmistakable. Family vacations, blurry birthday parties, aunts you didn't know. Someone always narrated too loud, and no one ever made it through without someone falling asleep. Elevators weren't automatic. They had people inside, wearing uniforms, sometimes gloves. They'd open the gate, turn a little crank, and call out the floors like they were conducting an orchestra. 4th floor, home goods, linens, toys. It was classy, and somehow it felt like you were going somewhere important. Every car trunk had one. A scratchy wool blanket that never actually got used. It was just there, just in case. For a roadside picnic, an emergency snowstorm, or a last resort towel at grandma's. It wasn't cozy, but it was loyal. Church clothes itched. The shoes were stiff. The collar never laid flat. But Sunday morning meant fidgeting on hard pews, counting ceiling tiles, trying not to giggle during prayers. Sometimes the sermon lasted forever. Sometimes you got a peppermint from Grandma. Either way, you earned brunch. Popcorn didn't come from a bag. You poured kernels into a metal pot, added oil, and shook like your life depended on it. It was an arm workout. The smell filled the house before the first pop, and when it overflowed the bowl, you knew you'd done it right. TV dinners weren't fancy, but they felt like a treat. You peeled back the foil and waited forever as the kitchen filled with that unmistakable smell. Overcooked peas, Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, and a brownie that never cooked right. It was a little metal tray of modernity. Tinsel wasn't plastic yet. It was thin strips of shimmering metal. And you didn't toss it. You placed it, one strand at a time. Christmas lights glowed behind it, making the whole tree sparkle like something from a postcard. It stuck to everything, and no one ever minded. Radio buttons clicked like little safes. You'd push one in, and the rest popped out, like jealous siblings. You could set your favorite station and find it with a single press. The sound crackled, the music played, and no one ever called it analog. It just worked. Behind the TV, little tubes glowed faint orange. They hummed softly, like the machine was breathing. If the picture flickered, you gave it a smack. If it died, someone went to the hardware store with a bulb in a paper bag. Fixing things wasn't optional, it was assumed. The whole country froze when Kennedy's funeral aired. Even kids knew. This was something heavy. Black and white images, that slow drumbeat, the riderless horse. It was one of the first times America truly mourned together, in silence, across millions of living rooms. Hair curlers weren't reserved for salons. You'd wind them tight before bed, hoping you didn't crush your skull in your sleep. Some were foam, some plastic, some had pins. And in the morning, you'd unravel them like a present, praying the curls lasted until lunchtime. School milk came in little cartons that fought back. You'd try to open them neatly, but they always tore, splashed, or refused to open at all. They came in crates, smelled slightly metallic. And no matter how cold they started, they were warm by snack time. Grandma's sewing machine didn't need electricity, just feet. You'd watch her work the pedal like a drummer, feeding fabric through with steady hands. It clicked, whirred, and made straighter lines than anything digital ever did. And somehow, it always smelled like dust and lemon polish. Coke came in heavy glass bottles, ice cold from a chest cooler. You'd pop the cap, take that first fizzy sip, and it tasted like summer. In the corner of some diners, you'd spot a cigarette machine. Metal levers, tiny windows, and that satisfying clunk when a pack dropped. Nobody asked your age. It was a different world. Not better, just different. Color TV didn't sneak in. It arrived with fanfare. When someone on your block got one, everyone visited. You'd stand there, arms crossed, nodding like you understood hue and contrast. Even the cartoons looked dramatic. It was like watching the future on a fuzzy little screen. Bank drive thrusts weren't just convenient, they were cool. You'd press the speaker, send your deposit flying through a clear tube with a satisfying whoosh. And it came back with a receipt, a lollipop, and the undeniable feeling that machines were finally on your side. Sunday comics used to be an event. You'd flatten out the paper on the living room floor and stretch across 2 full pages of color. Peanuts, Dick Tracy, Little Orphan Annie. Dad read the news, but for kids, the comics were the real headline. Back then, tipping your hat was a small gesture with big meaning. Men did it when greeting a neighbor or stepping aside for a lady on the sidewalk. Women wore white gloves downtown like it was nothing. Dressing nice was just part of going out, even to Woolworths. The sidewalk used to be a playground. Kids crouched in circles playing marbles, tossed jacks across the pavement, or tried to master pickup sticks without moving the whole pile. No batteries, no screens, just the sound of kids arguing over rules made up 5 minutes earlier. Some kids swore. You could hear secret messages. If you played your records backward, so there we were, spinning vinyl the wrong way, listening for whispers between guitar solos. Maybe it was just static. But at the time, it felt like uncovering buried treasure. Empty lots turned into baseball diamonds every summer. No coaches, no umpires. Just neighborhood kids and a pile of hats for bases. Somebody always brought a cracked bat and a ball wrapped in tape. And you didn't stop until someone's mom yelled, "It's dinner time." At department stores, you could stick your feet into an actual X-ray machine to check your shoe fit. You could see your toes wiggling inside the skeleton. It felt futuristic. And a little weird, even if nobody really knew how safe it was. School buses had no seatbelts, and no one thought twice. You bounced along on green vinyl seats, windows half down, backpacks rattling on the floor. Field trips weren't about safety checklists. They were about paper sack lunches and hoping you didn't sit next to the weird kid. Want to keep riding the nostalgia wave? We're not done yet, because up next, we're diving into the wild, colorful world of the 1970s. What's the one thing from the 60s you wish would come back? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If this stirred up a memory or made you smile, coming soon. We're taking you on a journey from the 1970s to the 1990s in our upcoming nostalgia series, only here on this channel. So stay tuned, stay curious, and stay with us. The next chapter of America's memory lane is just around the corner, because the past, it's not done talking yet.